So it is to our utter delight and honor that we have someone who's been a leading light, a guiding light, more than a leading light, because he's guided corporate thinking, the thinking of corporate professionals, corporate leaders, and business people across India and the globe for the last 4 decades. It's our absolute privilege to welcome you, sir. Thank you very much. And he's going to be in conversation with Benedict Paramanand. We've been speaking about Ben, so I will just glide into first the formal part of his introduction, and then I will add my own 2 bits to it. Benedict, so most of us call him Ben. He's an advocacy journalist and media entrepreneur. He started his career, like Hari mentioned just now, with the Economic Times in Bangalore. He founded the magazine Management Next in 2003. And when I used to work for Blue Star, I've told Ben this, we used to get copies over at office, because Blue Star has subscribed to Management Next those days. Management Next's idea or philosophy is to offer content that would promote holistic thinking in Indian managers and entrepreneurs. He followed that up with SustainabilityNext, which he launched in 2013. The idea of this magazine is to drive sustainability thinking and in fact foster that culture in entrepreneurs and businessmen in India, business people in India. The magazine recently, very interestingly, ventured into curating another literature festival, a unique one, the Green Literature Festival. It happens to be India's first fest that celebrates, that promotes writing on sustainability, on themes of environment, ecology, sustainability, and the intersection of all this with business. Ben has written 4 books, all of which tell stories that make a big impact. His book on CK Prahalad, which is called CK Prahalad, The Mind of the Futurist, is about how a professor inspired and guided the majority of large Indian business houses, just following the recession, the reforms of 1991. So how he inspired them and guided them to think big, think global. That's what the book is about.
And Gopal did a foreword for that book. Thank you, Gopal.
Lovely. It's so happy to have him here now. His Ben's latest book, which came out just a few months back, is titled Smash: The Rise of Indian Badminton, Stories of Grit and Triumph. This book chronicles the stories of people who've made the rise and revolution of Indian badminton on the global stage happen. And that's been a long drawn effort. A lot of work has gone behind the screens, which you and I may not be aware of. So Ben has spoken to people, he's researched that topic, and he's brought out that story for us. Ben launched BBLF, this fest, in 2015. With passionate co-founders and energetic teams, BBLF aspires to lead meaningful and deep conversations on business literature in the country. And we can only hope that we've done a good job of that in this edition also. So that being said, I just want to say 1 or 2 lines. Ben is the gentle in gentlemen. And in fact, so over the last few years, after close interactions, I can say that. And much like Hari said, he prefers to be, I think, a little self-effacing. He is that by nature. But a lot of connections, I think he's driven by purpose. The purpose in terms of spreading knowledge, in terms of bringing about some amount of change in whatever his circle of influence is. And his circle of influence is pretty large. So those are my 2 bits, Ben. I badly wanted to say this. Over to you. Please introduce Mr. Gopalakrishnan and take it over from there.
Thank you so much, Ganesh. I think I had quite a lot of things being said about me. Thankfully, most of them are good. I'm still yet to digest the Sai Baba metaphor.
You lack the hair, so you don't qualify for sure.
So thank you so much, Gopal, for accepting to come and do the honors. Absolutely privileged to have you here. And I found this very nice website cover. So I quite like the colors that you're wearing. Are they Fab India colors?
Something like that.
Okay, so I would like to make this a lighter, of course, with a lot of serious content from you. Make it like a fire chat. So my first question to you is, you put in 5 decades of amazing and enriching experience as a business leader, manager, and author. So we are here to celebrate your authorship. Yes. So where do I start? So I was a little puzzled that after 5 decades in the corporate world, you have started a firm to advise corporates. So I was thinking, wasn't 5 decades enough of being in corporate world? Didn't you want to do anything really radically different, something wild?
So is that a question?
Yeah.
Well, I must confess that those 5 decades were not necessarily seeing a wise Gopal. They were seeing a young Gopal trying to clamber up the pole, the hierarchy, making mistakes and learning. At the end of the 5 decades, I felt I had acquired some experiential wealth. You know, all of us spend our lives acquiring wealth. One is financial wealth or financial assets, and the other is experiential assets. And I felt I'd acquired some modest financial assets, which are characterized by being finite. You tend to make you selfish, and it depletes as you distribute it until you're called to order to St. Peter. On the other hand, experiential assets are infinite. The more you share, the richer it becomes. And it's unselfish and it's undiminished. And in an attempt to share my experiential assets, which I have, wisdom is like a muscle in the head. Unless you exercise it, it decays. It's like your biceps. And therefore, I decided that a small part of my time will go to advise corporates who want advice. But most of my time goes in talking to people, young people, managers. So that's why I call myself a corporate advisor, speaker, and author. And it's the speaker and the author that take up all my time. And some corporates ask for my advice, which I offer.
Okay. So just another offbeat question to start with. You're a ardent tennis player. You follow tennis quite closely, and you've been playing it for quite some time. There's one thing in common that I share with you. What have you learned from playing tennis that you've been able to apply in your corporate life?
While my comment will be about tennis, because that's the subject and the question you've raised, and it's my favorite sport and yours as well, my reply probably will apply to any sport. But
Okay.
the first thing I learned about tennis was that when I was 9 years old, my father took me to the Bengal Lawn Tennis Association, which was being run by a coach, a former Davis Cup player called Dilip Bose, who was in the 40s with Sumant Misra representing India. And he would make us run around the South Club tennis courts till we were dead beat, when we were eager to get up on the court and hit the ball. And when we told him, sir, we get very tired, he said, if you had only one car for all your life, how would you look after it? So we said very, very carefully. He said, well, the body that you have will be the only car you're going to get. And if you don't look after it, you can do nothing. Forget about tennis, you'll do nothing. So fitness is one thing that tennis has taught me, and I try to keep as fit as I can, appropriate to my age. The second thing that tennis has taught me is how to lose gracefully as when you win. I mean, one has played in one's time a modest amount of competitive tennis. And I represented my IIT at the Inter-IIT meet in 1965 or 1966. And that was the first time Kharagpur lost the Inter-IIT. And I stood on the grounds of IIT Bombay, Powai, and wept. I mean, I was a 20-year-old, 21-year-old person weeping. But I came back and I said, when you go to the locker room, you can weep. But you must learn to lose as gracefully as you feel proud when you win. So those are the two that come to my mind. There are many, many others, but I'll keep to that.
Okay, let's start talking about your books. Before I get into your books, I'd like to learn from you the kind of books that have inspired you right from your early stages in your career, and how you've used them in critical moments, crisis management.
Well, I won't run through 50 years because you may have to have a lit fest only to listen to the books. But I have been a fairly keen reader. Perhaps I've still read less than how much I should have read at my stage. But when I left my engineering education and started my career, I realized that I'm a very left brain guy. I didn't know the difference between the left brain and the right brain. I was spending all my time proving that I have a brain to my bosses so that I could rise in my career. But I was very rational, analytical, fact-based, cause and effect-based thinker. And suddenly in my career, I started coming across people who are what you would call right brain, who are painters, artists, writers, poets. And they seem to be two different worlds. Initially, of course, I dismissed all of them as crazy. So one of the things in how it impacted my reading was I started to read books on things like history, psychology, sociology, at the expense of keeping abreast with my technology stuff. But somewhere in the middle of my career, maybe when I was 50, 45, 50, I realized that this is a synthesis of the two. There is not one or the other, it is both. And I got very fascinated with some books which I read, like Theodore Cook's The Curves of Life, or Sensitive Chaos by Theodore Schwenk. I remember these two books because they all focused on the spiral. And the spiral answers to the mathematical problem of what is called a Fibonacci series. If I write the numbers 1, 2, the next number will be 2 plus 1, 3. The next will be 3 plus 2, 5, and so on. So it's an expanding spiral, right? That's the Fibonacci series. It's actually reported by mathematicians that Fibonacci series was known by a different name long before Fibonacci in the 1300s got to know it. And that led me to a lot of interest in nature, because nature is full of Fibonacci series. And management is about straight lines and efficiency. Management is about efficiency. Nature is about effectiveness. And it caused me to inquire what is the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And that led me to a whole host of books related to nature, animals, plants. And the rule in biology is effectiveness before efficiency. The rule in physics is efficiency before effectiveness. So if I ask you to go from point A to point B, you'll go in a straight line, or you'll attempt to go in a straight line. If you ask a fly to go from point A to point B, to go around in circles and then alight at point B. And what is the reason for that? The fly is doing it because that's effective for the fly. I do it because it's efficient. And life is not about only efficiency. Life is first about effectiveness and then about efficiency. You see this in the public space today. You know, we want to have this reform, that law changed. We try to do it with efficiency by just passing it through parliament without asking anybody. But it gets stuck for lack of effectiveness. You know? There are lots of examples. So there's one bunch of stuff that I'm just taking the spiral and the curves of life and sensitive chaos as the monikers around which I'm speaking. There's a second bunch, which is about the last talk between Hariharan Chandrasekharan and Padhu Padmanabhan was about sustainability. What makes an organization sustainable? I'm not talking in carbon terms. Carbon is only one. How can it be a harmonious member of society? How can it live a long life? Do organizations have a life? Yes, everybody has read the blurb that Fortune 500 companies are declining in their longevity. So I got very interested in reading books like Living Company, R.E.D. Goose, or Timeless Ventures by Funabashi. I've got a library of books on long life companies. Again, that's related back to nature and effectiveness and balancing with it. So these subjects, history, sustainability, long life, what we can learn from nature, has been a cluster of subjects around which, and they've also influenced the way I write and what I write.
Yeah, I was going to come to that question next.
What's that question?
I was going to come to that. How has it influenced your writing?
I wasn't aware that it's influencing my writing until when I look back, having gone through 16 books and about to come out with my 17th book, that it has influenced. But my first book I wrote, for which Ratan Tata was kind enough to write the introduction, the foreword, was called Intuition, you know. It is called The Case of the Bonsai Manager, but it is about human intuition. And I argued, arguably, all arguments are arguable, as Amartya Sen has pointed out, that leaders rise because they are very logical and rational. Leaders fall because they fail to use their intuition. And so what is the difference between rationality and intuition? And I took a lot of examples from nature, from the world of animals, birds, fish, to bring out the point that the human species is the only one. All other animal species think that they are intuitive. The leopard, if you could have a conversation with the leopard in the jungle or the bird that's flying, they would say it's intuition. Only human beings pretend to be rational, but are actually working through intuition. Because life's most important decisions are not taken rationally. For example, whom do you marry? I mean, if you took a rational decision on that, then the chances are you won't be married for too long. And so which job to take, which lit fest to attend, these are all intuitive decisions, right? You say, you know, Benedict Paramanand is doing fantastic work with very little resources. This is something I would like to reach out and support. So that is an intuition. That's not rationality. If I say he gets only 50 people attending and somebody else gets 500, well, that's another way to look at it. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but there is place for heart and head. So those are the ways in which I wrote a book called Crash, which was published by Penguin in 2018, about what makes leaders fail. And I came to what I consider to be a startling conclusion. They don't fail because they are stupid. They don't fail because they are arrogant. Those are all manifestations. They fail because leaders suffer brain damage. Of course, that created a fair amount of, I won't go into that because that's not our subject today. I also looked at
Did you lose many friends?
Sorry?
Did you lose many friends? Did you lose many friends?
No, many friends were kind enough to say you're a very good example of it yourself. So that is okay. How can 4 people go to a training course in Harvard or Wharton and come back with 4 different opinions if they are objective?
Okay.
And they do, right? And I wrote a book called 6 Lenses, that human beings look at situations through 6 lenses. And depending on how the lens is occupied on your nose, like an optician tests your eye, you come to very different perspectives out of the same thing. That there is no reality, there's only a perception of reality. Whereas we spend our whole life thinking there is a reality, there is fact, there is analysis. And you only have to listen to our philosophers who will tell you there isn't a philosophy, it's all Maya. And that's true. It's true of Litfest, it's true of businesses, it's true of personal relations. So it has influenced me in many ways, including, if I may add, probably the book that sold the least amongst all my books, but something that I'm the most proud of. I traced my family back to 1823.
That's in your comma in a sentence, isn't it?
That is correct. And I really enjoyed writing that book because from a small little village in Tanjore, which nobody's even heard of other than myself and a few others, how the family came out and how it was set in a context. It's not about my family. It's about how social change in India happened. It could be your family or anybody's family. So those are the ways in which all those things have influenced my thinking and my writing.
I thoroughly enjoyed that book, Gopal.
Yes, you saw it? You read it?
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a very nice way. This is one reason why I believe fiction and non-fiction are fictionally separate.
Okay.
It's a complete fiction. I'm compliment you on setting up a business literary festival. The only other person who's done it, I think, is the Tata Lit Fest in Mumbai, where Anil Dharkar, the late Anil Dharkar, used to run it, where we had the Lit Fest, and he started one called Business Shastra, which is the equivalent of a business. Because I think people think that fiction and non-fiction are different words, and even within fiction, there is so many genres, murder, mystery, thriller, romance, etc. But frankly, all fiction speaks to the heart and the human imagination. That's the overarching characteristic of fiction. And all of non-fiction is supposed to be dealing with facts and the mind. But it's at the intersection of fiction and non-fiction that I write.
Okay.
And therefore, I believe fiction and non-fiction are convergent and not divergent.
Which of your books is more fictional than facts?
Yeah, it all depends on what you mean by fiction. Fiction, for example, you take comma in a sentence, since you say you read it.
Yeah.
Whether my great-grandfather had the conversation that I have narrated in my book on the walk from my village to Manargudi. One can debate what's the historical evidence for it. Show me the records. My great-grandfather was not such a big man that somebody kept a record of his conversations. Okay. But I imagined a conversation that he had based on the personality that he had. That's fictionalized. But it is non-fiction that he existed and he did take that walk. I mean, that much. So it is very much like people write business stories, how I turned around my company. There's a lot of fiction in it. As I sat next to the Arabian Sea and looked out wistfully into the blue ocean, the thought suddenly passed my mind that I can turn my company into a multi-billion-dollar company. That's fiction. So I believe fiction and non-fiction are convergent. And while this will appall non-fiction people, it will also appall fiction people. I happily sit in the lap of both together in my writings.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this a little earlier about the power of history. So I believe that Indians really don't read much of history. And what I was going to ask you is, for managers, business leaders, how important it is to have that sense of history, not just of their company's history, but also history of where they live, history of the country, and how that influences their decision making.
I believe it's quite important. Okay. And I use the word history in a contextual manner rather than should he study Indian history or European history or Soviet history or American history. That's not the way you're using the word as I understand it. So if I worked in Hindustan Diva and I worked in Tata, one of the things I did was to say, I must know where this company came from.
Yeah.
If I am to be part of the team that's going to steer it forward. So I know everything about William Hesketh Lever and how he started Port Sunlight in 1865, what he said when he was asked with what he's going to do with his wealth, which was in 1885, and how Unilever became what it became. And if you ask me about Jamshedji Tata, I don't want to give you the impression I'm a Ram Guha of company history, but in a small way, I believe not only is it important, but it was important that I should imbibe that part of the history. So the great purpose of these two companies, which I've been the privilege to work with, has influenced my own thinking a lot. I mean, back in the 1880s, when William Hesketh Lever was asked, what is the purpose of your running a global empire? After all, you've taken a piece of soap and put some waxed paper around it and you called it sunlight. So what's so great about it? And William Hesketh Lever said, well, that's one way to look at it. But the second way is there are teeming millions all over the world waiting to be cleaned. And since 1886, that's exactly what Unilever has been doing to this day. It cleans up people. And the number of people waiting to be cleaned up, as COVID-19 has shown us, is infinite.
Yeah.
Likewise, Jamshedji Tata was asked, Why is how does your corporation play a role in society? He said, it doesn't play a role in society. It is for society. It is part of society. And all the stories about Tata are well known. I won't repeat it. So these have influenced my thinking about long life companies and how to create long life companies.
Yeah, so you mentioned about society, business and society. That's a huge debate. How have you captured that in your books?
You know, I'm glad you asked this question, because one of the most exciting things that I've done in my writing career, I consider this my third career. My first career was Levers. My second career was Tata, and I consider myself as being in my third career, is I have this opportunity to interact with a lot of academic people, you know. As you know, in any field of study, technology, law, management, the academics are on one shoot and the practitioners are on a different shoot, and these two shoots don't meet. They don't even talk to each other. They probably have a healthy contempt for the other, you know. But for the first time, I was thrown in at some faculty meeting. I asked the question that you just asked. I asked it in a different way. I said, what is the role of a good company and a good CEO with regard to society and this and that? And basically, to cut a long story short, 5 of the academics teamed up with me, and we identified 6 companies. We identified more than 6, but 6 people agreed to participate in our research, and wrote a small slim book on each. And one was on HDFC, one was on Biocon, which is your Bangalore-based company. One was on TCS, one was on Larsen and Toubro, one was on Marico, and one was on Kotak Mahindra Bank. None of these companies. Yeah, sorry.
So you told me that you wrote to 10 and only 6 of them came back with a reply.
Yeah, I mean, 4 regretted for various reasons, you know, these are companies were unknown when I began my career. You know, HDFC was not there. Biocon and all, of course, were not there. Marico wasn't there. So they've all happened what I call the liberalization period, you know, 80s onwards. And they've created fantastic institutions. Just these 6 companies, I'm not including Reliance and Hindustan Lever and other big companies, Infosys. Just these 6 companies accounted for 30% of the Bombay Stock Exchange market cap. Just these 6 companies. So this is a form of self-generation and self-renewal, which nature exemplifies.
Yeah.
And we figured out what makes institutional thinkers different from corporate thinkers, which brings together the left brain and the right brain in what we call the 3x5 matrix, which appears in each of the books.
Yeah. So sticking to this book, recent series that you brought out, you did tell me to my question while we were chatting earlier that there are books written on Biocon, there are books written on HDFC, right? And how is your book different? And you explained a very interesting model that you adopted. Can you just explain that?
In a nutshell, we were more interested in the institution rather than the person.
Okay.
Because the definition of an institution is it carries on after that person. So if I say Mughal dynasty and you say Babur and it stops, there's nothing to study.
Yeah.
If you say Mughal dynasty and somebody says Babur, somebody says Humayun, right up to Aurangzeb. And after Aurangzeb, we don't know what to say. But then that lasted 250 years. Likewise with the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire, etc., etc. So we were very interested in the institution. And one of the differentiating factors of the research was done by a collaboration between an academics and a practitioner. It's the first time such research has been done in India. I mean, there are lots of Jim Collins books which are celebrated in many lit fests, American views of how to create institutions in America. And they are highly focused on profit and highest return to the shareholder. Our books are saying it is not the highest return, but you're in a top class of performer. You may be the 3rd or the 4th in the pack, you know. And we identified 8 characteristics, of which 3 are we considered essential, and the other 5 the leader or the shaper, as we called him, chooses from. So we called it the 3+5 MBA.
Okay.
That doesn't stand for Management of Business Administration. It stands for Masters of Business. It stands for Mindset, Behavior, and Action.
Interesting.
And we were very tempted at one stage, at least I was, to put all these into a book, one book of 900 pages. Then we said nobody will buy it, and it may become sitting next to Ram Guha's book or Vikram Sampath's book, for sheer size and volume, except that their books are very interesting for common people to read. But 900 pages book is not easy to read. So we wrote 6 books of 130 pages each, so that people can carry it and read it and see how to convert their good companies into good institutions. So that's what's out in the market now.
Interesting. So I was wondering, do you have a certain formula that you apply, firstly in choosing a topic and going about, the discipline that you have in bringing it out? Because 16 books is not a joke. And I think you must be the most published business leader in India today. So just want to ask you the formula that you reveal your secrets.
Ben, honestly, if I'm only going to respond to you because you asked the question, but I have not either lived my life formulaically, and in hindsight, of course, I can arrive at some formula, but there are 3 or 4 things that guided me. I did what I wanted to do.
Okay, that's interesting.
And what I wanted to do was not write about how I turned a company around, how I improved the profitability, but how I've seen these things being done by other people. So I externalized and I became the observer, rather than most business books are written by people or sort of a hagiography, When I took over, it was this. By the time I retired, it was that. Therefore, their pictures appear on the cover. Here, no pictures appear on the cover other than the authors, by the way, that too on the flap on the backside. So it's a very different kind of book. The second thing that I found is it came out of a problem that I faced in my business. It was not theoretical.
Okay.
So the intuition book, for example, when I went, I was posted as chairman of Unilever Arabia, and I genuinely had a question. A lot of science, about 15 million pounds had been spent by Unilever researching and developing a particular detergent. As soon as I landed there and I got familiar with everything, my intuition told me this is not going to work. I'm not going into the detail because it will detract us. It's all in the book, The Case of the Bonsai Manager.
Yeah.
And I was caught in a dilemma that my common sense is saying it won't work, but all the intellectual, so-called rational stuff says it will work. Scientific research, consumer research, market research, 15 million pounds. And I have come here whistling in the dark, as it were. Which one should I trust? And I therefore got to study the subject of intuition. I'll take one more example. One of the privileges I had in both Levers and Tata was to be associated with young people through the management training programs that both companies ran. And latterly, after my hair started graying, when the other gen, the young gen, Z, Y, X, whatever you want to call it, they seem to be very dissatisfied. And people, my colleagues would say, other grey-haired oldies would say, the aajkal ke bacche aise, today's children are like this. I said, no, these people are your son and your daughter, my daughter and my son. We must go. And then I undertook some group discussion, if I might use that word, and found that it's what Prahalad, since you've written a book on Prahalad, you would appreciate it, called a gap between aspiration and resource.
Yes.
These people had aspirations which were vastly different. And I thought back to my childhood. I had aspirations very different from my father. My father came from a village. He didn't have a great education. And his aspiration was just to get some income coming into the family and raising a family. My aspiration was not just to raise money, to earn money, but to become something and to study in a good college. And my children's aspiration was to go to Harvard and Wharton.
Yeah.
So I wrote another book on that called The 4 A's of How You Should Design and Think of Your Career. So each book was triggered by a particular real life problem that I faced. And that's why, since all of us face a number of real life problems, it has not been difficult for me to find topics. I mean, just for your information, right now I'm working on 4 more books.
Oh my God. Okay.
Because as I come across a problem, I then start empirically checking. And that's what a good scientist does. He gets back to the lab and says, how can I deal with it? And that's what I try to do.
So one of the common things I've heard from a lot of successful authors is this very strong word, powerful word called stamina. So it requires huge stamina for to write a book, firstly, and to write 16 books. What is the kind of energy and stamina that you, where did you draw those resources?
Honestly, I don't know if it is, you're right to ask the question using the word stamina, but in my view, it is discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline is also a source of stamina, by the way.
Stamina. Yeah.
I mean, what is the difference between your tennis, my tennis, and Federer's tennis?
Yeah.
Okay, he's got discipline to do what he does.
Yeah.
You and I will go to the Bangalore club and hit the ball a little bit and get back and say we've had enough for today.
Yeah.
So when this problem started bugging me, how do I balance intuition and rationality, as an example, I became restless with it. And that brought in the discipline of inquiry. And the discipline of inquiry brought in the discipline of reading and research and talking. And the discipline of reading, research, and talking brought in the discipline of converting it for precision purposes into writing. The book emerged without any intent. I had never intended to write a book. But I used to make a lot of presentations. You know, every year I talked to about 8,000 to 10,000 people pre-COVID, through management seminars. I'm going to management colleges. My average audience per year is between 8,000 and 10,000. Of course, I've continued that after COVID through the digital route, except that the connection is far less. So in the last 20 years, I can comfortably say that I've talked to about 150,000 people. And in the physical, when you are there, people ask questions and that sort of triggers new ideas. So I think you end up, if I may be all familiar with the dish called avial, if I have the vegetable and if I have the beans and I have the shepangaranga and the various ingredients, then you want to know how to make the avial. So all my books are avials.
Okay.
They are not new truths. They are what you might call applied research rather than original research. I don't pretend to be an original researcher.
Okay. That's a revelation. I would like to invite the audience to post questions in the chat or in Q&A. We have 16 minutes to go. Yeah, so my next question is more on the publishing side, Gopal. So you've worked with 4 publishing houses, and each has a tradition of its own, both good and not so good. So how do you, managing them itself is it needs a certain, what do you call it, flair.
Honestly, out of my 16 books published so far, the large market share is of Penguin and Rupa. I think they've done 6 apiece or maybe 7 apiece. 7 apiece, that's right, I now remember. So 14 books are Penguin and Rupa. I've had one with Harper and one with Hachette. So it's not that I was handling a large number of publishers at the same time. Neither am I got any illusion that I'm such a big writer that the publishers have to hang around me. Luckily, I don't have to hang around the publishers either. We have a mutual respect and it has worked quite well. I think they're all classy publishers, the 4 I've worked with. I've been quoted by some other publishers, but I can't handle more than I am capable of. But
so how many of the 16 books have made money for the publishers? And of course to you?
I think if you're talking of making money, all of them have probably made money in the sense of at least break even. Comma in a sentence probably being a different genre sold the least. All the others made reasonable money, but none of them is in the thousands and millions and so on and so forth. None of them makes them rich. I am the Rahul Dravid of business writing.
I was going to bring that comparison, but I wasn't too sure. Okay, so your next book coming out in November is on pivoting your career. Tell us a little about it, please.
No, since a lot of my, I've got this hang up that I must empty myself of my experiential wealth. I'm not in a hurry to empty myself of my financial assets, because like everybody else, I think about how long you live and what you leave for your children, what you do for charity. But experiential assets, the richest place in the world is the cemetery. Because there are a lot of people out there whose names are cast in stone, who thought they were indispensable, but were found to be perfectly dispensable. And they've carried into the stone graveyard all the experience they had. And I want to empty myself of that. And I was having this conversation with another professional who happens to be my brother. He's also worked in large corporations. And we both decided to co-author that 17th book, Pivots in Your Career, Unleashing People Power. And the essence of what we are saying in that book is being published by Rupa and is coming out in 4 weeks' time, is we are trained to think and give a lot of emphasis to technology, to management, to productivity, to sustainability, all left-brained activities. But what makes business work is the right-brained activity of human relations. And we've narrated a number of anecdotes and experiences between the two of us in Levers, in Tata, in ITC and their associate companies, where both of us have given 85 years of our lives, professional lives, by describing those experiences and drawing a conclusion that how human behavior is the differentiator of a successful manager and not technical knowledge of IT or taxation. Whereas we spend our careers doing the opposite, trying to become better IT people, better copywriters in advertising, and so on and so forth. Better journalists, better editors, better publishers. But you've been in journalism, and that's when I first met you many years ago. Ultimately, the guy who wins is the guy who's good with people.
True. I think we can have a long discussion on that topic. So I'd like to take a question from Neetu. She's requested your views on balancing ambition and capabilities in life and career.
Don't balance them. I found ambition should exceed capability by a factor of about 20 to 30%. Ambition should be ahead of capability. I'm repeating what you have know very well after writing the Prahalad book. And therefore, capability should be the carriage and ambition should be the horse. And the horse should pull the carriage so that your capability is constantly improving as your ambition is improving. And the day you stop learning new things, your ambition also ceases. It's like the horse has got tired and the stirrups are weak and the carriage isn't moving. So to me too, I would say, I don't know whether 30% is the right number and I don't know how to measure it. But as they would say, अपने काबिलियत से ख्वाब जरा ज्यादा होना चाहिए.
Interesting.
And I'm using a Prahaladism.
Is it? Okay. I'd request more questions. This is such an interesting session. I would request some more questions either in chat or in Q&A. So until those come, I think to make the session a little more colorful, you're a man who uses metaphors a lot, both while speaking and even in your writing. So give us, say, the best metaphor that you've used, which works the best, which has worked the best.
I don't know if I can say which one has worked best because that's from a customer point of view. All I
Okay,
can say
whichever.
is when I use a metaphor,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of a metaphor I've used,
Mhm.
not because I was wanting to use metaphors, but because I wanted to explain a point of view and it worked well. And what is that? When we talked a little while ago about mindset, behavior, and action.
Mhm.
And in one of the sessions where I was talking about shapers of institutions, they said, can you explain this in simple English? Right? Because we management people like physicists and musicians and artists tend to go into jargon. So I said, where does a Ganga start?
Mhm.
They said Gangotri, somewhere up there in Uttarakhand.
Yeah.
I said, what does it look like when it comes into the Doab region, near Agra, UP? It looks like a big, broad river. And how does it look when it reaches the delta in West Bengal, in Bengal? They said, oh, it looks like a mighty river. It's got a number of rivers in it. It's a delta. So I said, your mindset is your Gangotri. It determines everything of how you read your life, how you think about life. Your behavior is the Doab,
Mhm.
and your actions are the delta.
Mhm.
If my mindset is, I must be somehow holding on to my job, I better not take my company into great acquisitions and big growth plans, then my behavior is one of caution and my actions are one of avoiding risk. Mindset, behavior, action. What we observe is the action. We see the leader through his actions. So you have a comment on the prime minister or the former prime minister, you'll say what he said yesterday and say he's a fool or he's a great guy, as the case may be. But actually there's a Gangotri. And I was trying to encourage the reader of our books to look at the Gangotri. And that's what we have captured in those 8 attributes that I've talked about. And we have shown how the Gangotri develops into the Doab, into the delta. So that's an example of a metaphor.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think people are so inspired by you, Dave, not asking questions. Okay. So my next question is...
there are actually 2 questions in chat, huh? So
are they?
Yeah, there are. I think instead of the QA, maybe they're putting it there.
There's a question from a Suresh Pai. To you,
it doesn't
yes.
look like a question. So,
okay.
Can you read?
All right, I'll for you, RGK, let me read, Ben. You write a lot of books on fiction based on a sense of reality too. Can you tell us whether you're using your left brain or your right brain while you write such books? Is one question from a man called Suresh Pai.
Frankly, I have not written any books on fiction, so I don't know what the question is. I said I try to converge. That's what I said. I try to converge fiction and non-fiction together so that it becomes right plus left brain. That's, I think, what I said. So I hope that answers the question that Suresh Pai had.
Yeah.
There's another question from Pooja herself. So I'll just read out that for you, sir.
Yeah, please.
Discipline is a very powerful tool, but it doesn't come easy to many because discipline requires you to go past inspiration and motivation. So how do you keep your discipline going, and what is the secret for that?
I don't think I can offer any secret other than to say...
I'm rephrasing her question. Yeah, how do you harness discipline was her exact word.
You see, discipline is the sun of your inspiration. So how does a father learn to look after his son? How does a mother learn to look after her daughter? Somehow that human love flows under the laws of gravity. It doesn't go upwards. You don't think of your grandfather as often as you think of your grandson. Right? That follows the law of gravity. It flows down. So when you get sufficiently inspired, then discipline comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's very interesting.
Anything which you don't have discipline for, you have to ask yourself, maybe I'm not sufficiently inspired.
Yeah, it's true.
Because as I've said in one of my books, there are different kinds of time. One is a Titan time, clock time. It's now approaching 7, and Ganesh should be telling Benedict through a little signal that bring it to a close. That's clock time. But if I'm having an interesting conversation with you, or when I was in college and I wanted to take my girlfriend out for a cup of coffee, my God, that 1 hour finished in 5 minutes. She said, okay, bye. And I said, oh my God, it's all finished in 5 minutes. But when I was sitting with a painful boss, 5 minutes felt like 1 hour. So there's clock time. There is emotional time, which is what I described. And finally, there is spiritual time. Most of us don't get to achieve spiritual time.
In fact, I did source few questions from rather crowdsourced questions. One of them asked that in your journey of writing 16 books, the last few books, there's spirituality that one can see in that. So is that a natural course for many writers when they set out to write?
I don't know about other writers, but when you're hitting your 70s and you know that every day is a bonus, you naturally become spiritual. It's never too late. If somebody has noticed a spirituality, I'm not aware of it. It's not conscious. I would regard myself anyway as being a spiritual person. But I don't use the word religious, but spiritual. Religion is in my private domain, and that's not concerned with it. But spiritual.
So this is a slightly provocative question. So a lot of the senior leaders in Tatas have written books on the Tatas. So why haven't you tried one?
It's one of the 4 that is on my anvil.
Oh, okay. So yeah, a connected question. There's so many books on the Tatas. How do you, what is it that is common and what is it that's different?
Well, some of them are highly researched books because we got an archives, both in Jamshedpur and in Pune, and all sorts of letters and documents are available there. What Swami Vivekananda said to Jamshedji Tata in 1892 on a ship from Bombay to Yokohama, very few people keep those records. So there is, but many of them are anecdotal also. Like Kumi Kapoor has written a book recently on the Bawajis, So those are interviews based. The point is that Tata is a very interesting subject to study. You may be admirer, you may be critic, you may be somewhere in between. That's a personal choice you make. But it is the only group, company, business in the world, I emphasize, in the world, which has held the number 1 position without a break for 86 years.
As number 1?
From 1939, I've got the record of who's the number 1 business group. It is not that it wasn't the number 1 before 1939, but I don't have any records. So that is 61 years of the last century and 21 years of this century. So I'm saying 82 years. It's been the number 1 group.
In what?
In market capitalization, in value, in sales, profits. So how come? Because when Fortune 500 companies are dying like fleas, how come somebody is not only alive? It's like BKS Iyengar, at 100 he could do yoga. Well, it is certainly something worth studying. And Tata is a BKS Iyengar of business.
So we'll draw to a close. Thank you so much, Gopal, for doing this. And all the best for your future books. And please keep writing more.
Thank you, Ben, for having me over. And whatever your problems may be in running the business BBLF, please continue the wonderful work that you're doing. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.